more capital freed up for investments in businesses that have a higher chance of success, and you have more human capital freed up as opposed to spinning their wheels trying to start something they might not be a fit for. They're able to contribute their talents to another business. And so it ends up, again, the more self-awareness that exists in the business space, the more successful everything is as a whole.
You're absolutely right. So what would you say maybe some of the roadblocks are that you would warn people against? You kind of mentioned some of those there, but are there any specific roadblocks that you think of?
Actual roadblocks themselves, I mean, a lot of them, again, is more laying and thinking about the groundwork, but I'd say the roadblock is making sure you pick the right people as you're growing, and sanity check that against values. And by values, and mind you, I've made this mistake in the past. We think of things like, we're going to be humble and grateful and ethical. Yeah, those might be your values, but did you take time to figure out why in the context of what you're doing? Because in reality, those should also drive the people you're bringing in. And think ahead. I mean, build the vision for the humans that are going to help grow your business a year, 3 years down the road in your mind. Okay, I know in the next year to get to this next goal, we need to go and find, again, an engineer to build this thing. All right, well, once we build it, what's next? Well, we got to sell it. So who does that person look like? And it's thinking about that stuff well in advance, and then not being shy about being honest with those people that might fill those spots. Because I think a lot of people end up going both extremes where they're not particularly transparent, and that ends up hurting their ability to gain the people, or they wait too long and, then suddenly, okay, we're ready to go and sell this thing. And now we got to go spend 6 more months finding the right person. So what do? You either delay sales or you hire the wrong people. And neither of those is really a great scenario. So I'd say it still comes down. That's probably the underlying theme that anybody listening would hear is people is it. I mean, life is about people and figuring out how to work with them, and then overlaying problem solving and process to make things easier.
And something you've been mentioning kind of several times, either directly or indirectly, is when you're having that focus, is then also sort of reverse engineering it, taking it backwards to this is where we want to go. Now, what does it take to actually get there? And the people are part of that, but taking the time as a business owner to reverse engineer the process. Taking those key process indicators, as we call in my business, and just take it all apart and look at the pieces, and then evaluate those pieces and what does it take to make those pieces. Just reverse engineering it, and making sure that you can put it back together the correct way. Then
absolutely. Well, and it's figuring out too. It's like, how do you do things in a sustainable and consistent manner? I mean, anybody that has content production as a portion of what they're doing. And again, I've fallen into this trap myself where, especially when you have a really small team or you're starting out, you get super excited and you go create all this content for, 2 months, and then it disappears because you've got other stuff come up. And then 3 months go by and you're like, man, this is bad. And then it creaks up. And the perception externally is that you're basically a schizophrenic business, and probably run by one person, because that's what happens. I mean, we can see through it. So it's kind of looking at those micro challenges and say, I know it's difficult, but instead of, cranking the volume up to 10, why don't we keep it at a steady 5? Because a steady 5 is better than, somebody going, up and up. And then it's also figuring out, I think a lot of people don't realize how inexpensive it is to go find, contract talent for 10 to 20 hours a week, whether it's for, personal assistance, it's for communications, those sorts of things. I mean, you can find individuals from, on the low end, $25 an hour, on the high end, like $70 an hour, that can do these things that, significantly move the needle, presuming you have the right process to then handle it and come back to it. I mean, we've done this with OSD recently and working with Mad Skills that places military spouses in those type of jobs. And the gal that we have working on communications right now is amazing. I mean, it's one of these things where, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, I almost want to hit my head against the wall saying, well, why didn't we do this a year ago? Because the value of what she's able to bring to the table for what we're paying for it is immensely better than my inability to focus on that consistently at the amount that I cost to do it. And so it's constantly, again, looking at those types of things and figuring out, well, what can we do and what can we adjust today to, again, have that consistent message going out.
Yeah. And here another gold nugget there is just delegate.
Yeah.
So what are some of the specific resources you again kind of we're mentioning some of those, like virtual assistants or being able to outsource, but what are some specific resources that you've come across that you've taken advantage of maybe?
So I'd say from a technology stack, it's finding the right products. I mean, we use Hootsuite is one, which I think that's a good resource. Making sure you find a good CRM. Unless you're a wizard with Excel spreadsheets or Google Sheets, which I don't think most people are as much as they are. I'd say reading in general. I mean, that's really comes down to. I'm an avid reader. I'm a fan of books, probably more so than reading blogs. I mean, I'll read blogs now and again from people that I look up to, Simon Sinek or something. But he also is writing books, and the reason why I've been doing as much is it forces you to kind of pull yourself back from technology for a little bit, because let's face it, when we read blogs, we're reading it on a computer or an iPhone or something, and those really force you to think about something that's slightly more timeless, because it was written to be something physical, something static. And sure. I recommend a couple books that I've come back to a few times. One of them is called Sense Making, and sense making, for context, is kind of the other answer to design thinking. So, the design thinking process has a lot of the different aspects of what we've been talking through here. It's coming up with outcomes-based ideas based on human-centric design, but it's focused on action, not just talking about it. But one of the inherent challenges is, and that's why kind of sense making comes up, is it's really looking at the why. Why are we actually doing this? Why does this make sense? Hence the name. And so I've really liked that book. And then another one is Thinking Fast and Slow. That one's a little bit dry for some people. It really gets into a lot of behavioral psychology. But I would strongly suggest anybody that's serious about any human-facing role or running a business, at least become a hobbyist with behavioral psychology. What's great about psychology is, again, at scale, it is what it is, and it has been that way forever. We behave the way we are and continue to behave that way. And so there's always a little gut instinct that needs to go into things. But if we're interacting with people in a certain way, and it's not working, and you realize you're running counter to how our brains actually function, again, as an individual, in small groups and large groups, it ends up making just adjusting to the reality of how our brains work is huge. And really, it's pandering. It's what it is, pandering to the reality of the way our brains work. But the more and more you can become okay with that, that part of science, I actually think it makes jobs easier. And so I've my whole outside of the nonprofit, a lot of my consulting work, that's what it comes from. It's basically making sense out of people and, coming up with pretty solid bets on where we should take products or services based upon how, our identified demographic thinks. But outside of that, the main resource is just, finding other people that you can have legitimate conversations about, that you can be open with, about your challenges. I'm definitely big in even sharing kind of the personal side of things, mainly because I think that massively impacts what's happening in your professional world on a daily basis. And so taking that into account is big. So I don't know if that answers it directly. I don't have a magic 8-ball or anything I really go to, but reading and talking, those are the two primary resources.
Oh, some good ones there. And I appreciate those, couple of books that you had mentioned. So, it gives some people some things they can look at. And, you're right. The psychology that's involved in business is pretty amazing, because, when you understand who's across the table from you, then you also understand how you're going to react to that person. Mm-hmm. And, most importantly is understanding what type of a person that you are to be able to pair up with the type of person that's across the table.
Absolutely.
because, they need certain things and we're going to convey certain things. So knowing how to adjust and work with that is going to make or break the deal.
Absolutely.
So as far as we were mentioning earlier, values and belief systems, how do you incorporate that into your business projects that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I'd say my faith certainly drives my day to day, and part of that is the ethical approach, and I'd say not just the ethical approach, because I think it's mailing in to say that it's the why, but secondary to that, it's the service. I mean, I truly believe, as I mentioned prior, we're put on this earth to serve others, and to figure out how we can create other servant leaders to serve others. And it's probably the most succinct answer I could give. When I wake up in the morning, I'm trying to do my best to figure out how can I serve other people today, micro and macro. So it goes back to that balance of, if I could, I'd love to talk to 20 individuals. I'd love to sit down and talk with each of them for an hour and figure out how we can identify something they're trying to work through and determine next steps together within a lot of the frameworks that we've discussed here. But that's not, that's not going to happen the way we like it. So it's looking at the bigger picture of how do we use a platform or a soapbox that has been created to reach more people with the broader side to maybe inspire others to then go do the same. And so that's really, in talking to a lot of people, especially in the, veteran advocacy space, and especially I've had this conversation with women as well, but certainly with men is, if faith is something that drives you, bring it up and talk about it. Because I actually think it creates a more honest conversation. Not that if somebody has a different set of beliefs or faith that you should cast that aside. Absolutely not. But I think the better you can understand somebody's motivations and where they come from, the better you can help them. And so that's where, if I look at, say, somebody that, maybe is battling alcoholism or something, the whole thing about the 12-step program is still rooted in faith. It's this cleansing, and it's this repentance and able to move forward with it because of our nature. And there's people that have gone into that certainly don't prescribe or are not Christian, and that's completely fine, because there's still this underlying set of ethics and values that are there. So that's really, again, at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is wake up in the morning and say, how can I at least make a positive mark on somebody else, so that if today's my last day, we can go out with a win.
Yeah. And something that I certainly embrace, with being a person of faith as well, is not shying around that, because when you try to shy around really what makes you who you are, then that's not going to create a good business relationship with the other person. And so when it's right there in the middle of the table, it's no longer the elephant in the room, so to speak. It's something that's very aware. And if that's a problem for the other person, that's okay too, because you probably shouldn't be doing business with them in the first place.
Yeah.
If it's that much of a stumbling block. And so, that's why I tell people, I don't shout around it. It's within the first 5 minutes, people are already know where I stand. But that's, it's to protect their time. It's protecting their time as well as mine.
Well, that's where you hit it on the head. I mean, you see this constant argument in the professional space, faith and politics, we can't talk about that. And I've always thought that to be odd. I think it's just the nature of, again, how we communicate today being somewhat broken. I truly believe if you can't talk about that stuff, even if you don't agree, you can't really have a relationship with somebody. Like, you have one on the surface, but if you don't understand what their motivations are, and I've always said politics somewhat, and tends to be kind of a day-to-day manifestation of what somebody's faith actually is, because, or at least it should be. Politics, if it's based upon actual policy, should be a reflection of your underlying values. And, it's not a purpose to get into an argument with somebody. It's to have intelligent discussions, because at the end of the day, again, what drives one person versus another to wake up and, struggle to build a business is coming from two different perspectives. And being able to understand that is huge. And, whether or not somebody wants to believe it, I truly believe, faith as a general word is what drives everybody's ability to go out in business, whether it's faith in, God and following Jesus, or it's faith in just whatever the heck it is you believe in.